All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the third of our four webinar series on the topic of AmeriCorps grant writing. And today's topic is going to be performance measures and evaluation. But before we get started, we just want to take a few minutes to do our building the learning environment that we've done every time. And we'd like to start with introductions. And if you all could just type in the chat your name, organization, and one thing you've done in the last week that brought you joy. Do something a little bit different than ask you to talk about AmeriCorps. Take a few minutes to let you all do that. While you're doing that, I'm just going to walk through the agenda. We're going to, like we have, start with just some AmeriCorps 101, particularly as it relates to the topic at hand. We're going to talk about evidence building because we can't talk about performance measures and evaluation in isolation. It's all a part of evidence building that we'll talk about. Then we're going to hit the topics of today around performance measurements and evaluation, wrap up with talking a little bit about culture of learning, and then just talk about next steps in our final session. So let's look and just see if there are any chats that have been shared. All right, yard work, very joyful. That's awesome. Sitting out in the sun. So it sounds like y'all are having a turn of weather. Oh, we have some birthday celebrations. Oh, nice. And Liz is visiting host sites and visiting AmeriCorps members and site supervisors. Those are some of my favorite things. Nice. It looks like everyone's really happy about the turn in weather and birthdays. Great. Keep them coming. We like to hear about what's going on. We have to remember those joys because sometimes AmeriCorps and just the world gets a little stressful. And so it's really nice to focus on the things that bring us happiness. All right. I like that. Bought a new birdhouse and waiting for the next residence. A beautiful bike ride. Wonderful. Lots of different celebrations. Thanks for sharing. All right. Well, again, my name is Amy Salinas, and I, in partnership with Jennifer Coward, are going to be presenting this topic today. If you all have any questions as we go through the training session, we'd like you to encourage to submit them in the chat. We will have times where we'll pause for questions, and you can ask them verbally or type them in the chat. But as we're going, if something comes up, don't hesitate to put it in because we can either answer it at the point in time where it's most relevant, or we can note it for another session or our last one if it's applicable then. So make sure you get those questions out. No questions are bad questions. All questions are important because you have them and you want to know the answer. All right, so we talked about this on our first two calls. Writing an AmeriCorps grant first requires that you understand some of the foundation information that guides what AmeriCorps programs do and what they should be about. In terms of performance measures and evaluation, it's really important that we talk about a few things. So here's the visual we've shown each webinar. It represents the areas on which all AmeriCorps programs should integrate as they think about their program design. You've heard us say it. We call them the legs of the stool because if one or more legs are missing, it falls over. And these are what make AmeriCorps what it is. These legs are get things done, strengthen communities, strong member experience, specifically encouraging responsibility and expanding opportunity, and then brand and core identification. And when you think about performance measures and evidence building, the get things done leg is what we are discussing for today. So want to talk about this just a little bit more. We did talk about this on the second webinar. We talked about how programs must be able to demonstrate a compelling community problem through data or other information and have clear activities that address the problems. And we talked about that in terms of the logic model and the program design elements of the narrative. But for this one, we're talking about the pieces on the right. Programs must be able to demonstrate impact and evidence of success through performance measures and beyond. And of utmost importance is being able to demonstrate that you have proposed activities or a program model that are based in evidence of success or will likely lead to success. And you'll have the capacity to show those numbers and impact as you operate your program. just to talk a little bit more, when your program is operating and your members are out there doing their really important service activities, you need to be able to report on and document key indicators of success. And these are your performance measures, your outputs and outcomes. How many people will be, how many people served will be a success. How will you know when members are doing something that will eventually move the needle? And then over time, you have to grow your evidence in other ways, going beyond your performance measures, which we'll be talking about when we talk about evaluation. And when we talk about this topic, we make some really important assumptions that we know are true, and we like to say as we get started. Each of you represents organizations and AmeriCorps programs that want to make a great impact on your communities and its people, and you strive to create a program that does so. We know all of you all are doing this work because of that. You care deeply about the work you do, the people with whom you work, the members that are a part of your program, because you just told us you love those site visits, and the communities in which you're a part. You all represent organizations that believe learning, analysis, and adaptability are important. All of these things we know are true about you because you're here in this world. And performance measures and evaluation are two of the ways that can help you do that. So we just want to emphasize that because it's not just about a requirement of your grant, it's because it's important and you care about the work and you want to show that what you're doing is impacting the communities, the environments, the people that you're serving. So again, we want to just remind you to put any questions that you have in the chat as we get started, and we'll go ahead and begin with talking about evidence. So performance measures and evaluation, the two topics for today's webinar, are both data collection strategies that help you build evidence that your AmeriCorps program is making the impact you hope it to make. So we want to start here to make sure each of you understand why these two topics are important, just beyond, like I said earlier, a requirement of the grant. So in the grant application, there's a place that asks you to talk about your evidence in the narrative. In it, you're asked to talk about what information you have that makes you think that what you're proposing for members to do will result in the change you are hoping to see. And as you can see, this evidence can come from many different sources, including the ones we're talking about today. So it can be your own data, it can be other people's data, it could be research in the field, your own evaluation, whether it's a outcome or impact evaluation, or other organizations' evaluations that are like yours. And while the criteria can change from year to year in the RGA or the NOFO, whatever you're applying to, ultimately this is something that you all have to do. And essentially, evidence in just really simple terms is information, facts, or details that are systematically obtained in a manner that is replicable, observable, credible, and verifiable for use in making judgments or decisions. Ultimately, evidence enables us to determine whether or not a program is achieving its intended outcomes. Now, there's a lot of words in that first definition that we're going to probably come up a little bit in the performance measure discussion because it's really important that you collect information that is replicable, that is observable, that is credible, and that is verifiable. Because if it's not, then essentially the data is not good and it can't help you in making judgments or decisions because it's not good data. So these words are really important. You're going to see how they show up in the performance measure piece that we talk about. AmeriCorps talks about evidence as a continuum that all programs must find themselves on. On the left-hand side of the continuum, we have what's called evidence-informed programs. Evidence-informed programs are ones whose intervention is based on organization wisdom, qualitative studies, finding from performance measures, basic research, a strong logic model, or a history of demonstrating some positive results. We call that the lower level of evidence. On the right-hand side of the continuum, you have what's called evidence-based. Evidence-based programs are ones whose intervention is based on research or backed by statistically significant evaluation findings. So again, if you fall on the left side of the continuum with that evidence informed, your evidence is at the minimal level. If you fall on the right side of the continuum with evidence based, your evidence is at the maximum level. While not all programs can make it to the far right-hand side of the continuum, that evidence-based side, it's a good practice to move yourself along the continuum as your program evolves. So what we're talking about today, performance measures and evaluation, can help you at various levels of the continuum. But no matter, where you are on that continuum, every program has to start on that evidence-informed side with grounding themselves in good data on the performance measures. And that's where most brand new AmeriCorps programs should be, on the evidence-informed side. And then once they have a few years of collecting good data, they can start to move along that continuum and gather other information that helps them build their evidence. And when we talk about evaluation, we'll talk about how you can move along that continuum. Ultimately, programs should be able to back up their program design or logic model that we talked about on the second webinar with evidence. Or said another way, programs should gather evidence that demonstrates that the proposed intervention is likely to lead to the proposed outcome. And when we talk about the proposed intervention, it's in terms of like the design, the duration, the dosage, the frequency, like what you're doing and the way you're doing it is resulting in the outcome you hope to see. And performance measures provide a part of that information that helps you answer the questions and tell your story. An evaluation tells another part of it. Ultimately, any information or evidence you collect should help you to answer some big questions. How do you determine what members are going to focus on? What demonstrates that the path you're taking will lead to the success and change you're hoping to see? It also should help you see what's worked successfully in the past that should continue and what modifications need to be made for greater impact if you're, not seeing some of the results you're hoping to see. And evidence, when you really break it down, is the same as what people might call in the business world research and development. You take a product like your program and you conduct research on it so you can fine tune, improve, strengthen, and adjust. So evidence really is a discipline process for learning, for testing, for improving. Its purpose is to test to see if things are working like you need it to and want it to innovate, to develop. It's not just a requirement, and it should be seen as a commitment to use data information to improve your outcomes and to advance equity and impact on the communities and environments you serve. And it's also a way to elevate voices where those we serve help shape what evidence we collect. It should be a participatory process also where you engage others in this work. And if you remember on our last webinar, we talked about the logic model as a part of the program design. And not only is this a requirement of the grant, but it's also a tool to help you explore what you want to collect information on. After you create your logic model, you should be able to take that step back and look at it and ask yourself, what question do you want to answer about your program and what can you look to see how things are going? And that should help you think about both your performance measures and any other data you want to collect and evaluation you want to do moving forward. So it's not just a requirement of the grant, it's a tool to help you see what data you should and want to collect. And while our conversation today is going to be on that get things done piece, you can also talk about evidence building and evaluation in terms of your members. So remember on the last webinar, we talked about the logic model being about both the member experience and the get things done leg of the stool. We showed the sample that integrated both of those pieces in it. And while this is a program that's focusing, primarily on literacy interventions to make change in K through third grade students, it also has a part about the members. So data collection and evaluation could also be on the member side of things to learn about how they're doing with members. But for today, we're going to be talking about the getting things done side, and we're going to use the literacy program that we started with on the second webinar as our foundation for examples we provide. Okay, so Um, we're going to also talk about, you see a stool reference often with us. We're talking about the evidence continuum in terms of a stool. So many programs rely solely on the information they collect on their performance measures to report on what impact they're having. And that's a good place to start. It's where you have to start. So that's one leg of the stool, collecting good data on your performance measures. But if all you do is collect information on your performance measures year after year, your program's not super strong in its evidence. It's kind of weak. It's again, it's a great place to start, but if that's all you stay at, then you're not really telling your full AmeriCorps story. But if you start to grow your evidence, and this could be just an other data you collect and also evaluation work you do, then and you start to see more positive results through the data you collect, then that helps to build a stronger foundation to tell your story about and to learn from. So we're just going to give you an example of an evidence stool from the literacy program. The question that they want to answer is our intervention on K through 3 students having an impact on students' academic success? And their performance measures, which will be what we talk about as we discuss performance measures, are the ED1A, which is number of individuals served, but their outcome is ED5A, which is the number of students with improved academic performance. And to report on that, they're going to get data from the schools on their MAP assessment scores. So that's the one leg. But if they got really grounded in that one leg and started getting really good data on performance measures, then over time, they might want to collect other information that helps build their evidence stool. So they might collect teacher reported feedback, report card grades, they might do their own literacy assessment, and all of that helps to build the legs of the stool to help them grow in their evidence. It doesn't take them all the way to the evidence-based side, but it makes them stronger on the evidence-informed side because they're getting multiple pieces of information that says something good is likely happening. Okay. So we're going to now take you to performance measures, where we're going to talk about that first leg of the stool and what we call building evidence. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Jennifer take over.
All right, everyone, let's dive in now to performance measures. Like Amy said, that first leg of the stool for building evidence. So in the Code of Federal Regulations, performance measures are defined as what you see here on your screen, okay? So they have to be measurable indicators of a program's performance as it relates to member service activities. They have to have a process of regularly measuring the service provided by your program and the effect your program has in communities or on the lives of members or community beneficiaries. And then the main purpose is really just to strengthen your AmeriCorps program and foster that continuous improvement and to identify best practices and models that merit replication. Okay. They can also help identify programmatic weaknesses that need attention. Performance measures are a required element of your AmeriCorps grant, and they serve as a major part of your reporting to serve Washington and AmeriCorps. They really help to tell part of the story of your program and should represent the primary activity your members do. The measurements you select should represent things you can reasonably count and in which you can share meaningful impact along that primary intervention we keep mentioning. And they're also a tool to help you learn to see if what you're doing is working or if what you're doing needs to be modified. On the flip side, performance measurements do not represent all that you do. We know you all do a lot of different things, so performance measures are not going to tell that whole story of your impact. They only support that one leg of that evidence stool, and they're not set in stone. So if they're not working, you can change them. And you would go through that process with Serve Washington or during a recompete or continuation application process. AmeriCorps requires that all programs include at least one aligned set of performance measures, and that means one output and one outcome that correspond to your program's primary intervention. These measures must be aligned, which means that the numbers and results outlined in the output and outcome address the same service activity and focus on the same group of beneficiaries or service recipients. And if you select national measures for both your outcome and output, you have to ensure that you follow what's required by reading what's in the instructions, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you have an applicant developed outcome, you still have to create rules and definitions for which you can use the National Performance Measure instructions to give you ideas on what things you might have to consider. So if we look at the first piece, the output, this is the amount of service provided. They measure the completion of activities and document the fact that individuals received services, products were created, or programs were developed. The second half, the outcomes, reflect the changes or benefits that occur. Outcomes can reflect changes in individuals, organizations, communities, or the environment. And this may include changes in attitude, knowledge, behavior, or condition. Outcomes answer the question, what difference did our service make for beneficiaries, or how did the new system or product enhance the capacity of the organization to serve the community? It's important to understand that AmeriCorps does not require that you have a set of performance measures for every activity that members do. I mean, I've worked with clients that have like 5 sets of performance measures, okay? AmeriCorps clearly states in their instructions, all performance measures must reflect significant program activities whose outputs and outcomes are consistent with the applicant's core theory of change. Applicants are not expected to have performance measures for every activity. And AmeriCorps states that they value the quality of performance measures over the quantity of performance measures. The expectation, again, is strictly one output and one outcome. Okay. As we stated a few minutes ago, AmeriCorps provides you with a list of what we call national performance measures for each of the 7 focus areas from which you can pick. But AmeriCorps also states that if you cannot find a national set of measures that fits with your theory of change and logic model, then you can create your own, and that's what we call an applicant determined measure. So let's look through those instructions a bit, because it's important that each of you reads the performance measure instructions and follows what is written for your selected performance measures. This is key to good data collection practices, which helps ensure that your data is good and then can be reported on and learned from knowing it is reliable data. This slide outlines the different sections, and I'm actually going to pull up the measures so that we can go through these sections in the actual measures. AmeriCorps this year actually put out 3 sets of performance measures. The first one is the national performance measures, which are kind of tried and true that have been around for a while. The second set is for the public health AmeriCorps programs that are now enveloped into the same funding stream. So if you formerly had a public health program or are focusing on public health, these measures are the ones you'd probably want to look at. And then the last set, the newest set, is an applicant determined performance measure supplement, along with suggested applicant determined performance measures for Native nations and bridge building. Okay, they're all kind of outlined in the same manner. So we're going to start with the main national performance measures. Okay, each year AmeriCorps issues their notice of funding opportunity that includes instructions for the performance measures for the following grant year. Essentially, the instructions are divided into a few main sections, which we'll go over now. Okay, the first section is the table of content, right? Just tells you where everything is. The second section are the AmeriCorps requirements, and this is just a general summary of what AmeriCorps requires with regards to the performance measures. The next section are the selection rules, and this provides information on what outputs and outcomes you can select from based on the objective of your primary intervention. Right? From there, the performance measure instructions are separated. So we get through the selection rules. Sorry if I'm making y'all dizzy. From there, the performance measures are divided into the 7 distinct focus areas. Okay, so this one, I'm going to skip down. We'll skip to education because that's the one Amy has been talking about. Okay, oops, I'm sorry. We're switching back and forth here. Okay, there we go. They're separated into those 7 distinct focus areas, and for each performance measure, the following details are provided in this instruction grid that you see on your screen. The first piece is a definition of key terms, and this provides very clear details about key terms in the specific performance measures so that you as an applicant can determine if that measure is applicable to your program design and target population. The second part of the grid is how to measure or collect data. And this provides very clear details about your target population, your data collection tools and strategies, and any requirements that you as an organization are held to for that specific measure. Okay. After these sections occur, we're going to scroll way down to the end. There are some appendices. Okay. The first one is understanding MSY and member allocations. For each of the performance measures you choose, you are required to enter the total share of program resources, so both MSYs and members that will be directed to each measure. And it is critical that you understand how to enter these allocations correctly. And Appendix A that I'm showing here provides that information to you. Appendix B is a checklist, okay? And this is used by reviewers to assess your performance measures. So you should use the PM checklist to ensure that you do not miss important general items, as this will result in clarifications, okay? As always, the checklist does not include all potential performance measure problems, only the most common. And then Appendix C are frequently asked questions. And this is a list of questions that past applicants and grantees have asked for, which AmeriCorps feels you need to be aware of, or that AmeriCorps wants to make sure everyone sees the same response. Okay, like I said, the other 2 sets of instructions are laid out fairly similarly, so it's important for you to review the set that applies to you. All right. So the first thing you have to do after you thoughtfully create your theory of change and logic model is to determine if there is a set of national measures, outcome, and output that serve as relevant data that will help support one of those evidence legs you want to collect to grow your evidence that your program is making this impact, to provide evidence on your theory of change. So to make that decision, it's helpful to first look at the selection rules section of the performance measures. Okay, in each focus area, and I'll go back up here and I'll show you where that was in the instructions. This is what we mean by the selection area. Okay, so in each focus area, it states specifically the output and outcomes for which you can select. And it states that if you choose a specific output measure, then you can choose from one or more outcome measures. All right, so for example, if you propose an AmeriCorps program design that's focused on literacy tutoring in grades K through 3, like the example we've talked about already, your output would be ED1A, which is number of individuals served, and your outcome would be ED5A. So using these, we're going to talk through the instructions and requirements that are applicable to any other performance measure set you might have. For the output of ED1A, number of individuals served, there are things you have to define, like the items you see here on the screen. Many of you, no matter which focus area your program targets, has the same output, number of individuals served. If you're an environmental program or doing capacity building work, then you will include things besides individuals, but the same principles will apply. Right? So you have to determine the individuals you will serve, the target, and the definition of served, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth here. Excuse me. Additionally, you have to determine and talk about the tracking tool you will use to report on the number of people or organizations that were served. Your data collection tool has to be able to ensure you are not counting individuals or organizations more than once, and it has to help you determine when people or organizations have met your, quote, definition of served. When you think about the served definition, you have to consider some factors that can have an impact on what you ultimately decide on. So the first thing you have to think about is need. And for us, that is K through 3rd grade students who are behind 1 grade level or more, many of whom represent students who are English as a second language. Okay. Access is the second point. And you have strong partnerships with the schools and teachers, so they are able to pull kids for one-to-one support 3 times per week. Then you have to think about what is fully required to move the needle. So you're going to be doing academic calendar year support, meaning 3 times per week based on past data collection effort. And then what's a marker along the way that lets you know you are on your way to success? Okay, so if we take all of those factors into consideration, when we think about that overall dosage you're trying to provide to the students, your goal, let's say, is to provide 35 total sessions to each student your member serves. That is your overall dosage. Okay, they're doing those 35 sessions for 30 to 45 minutes per session, 3 times per week. Okay. And you know that if you reach a certain mark, which I'm calling the subset dosage, that will start to move the needle along the change you're hoping to see, increasing that literacy. But it'll not be the total dosage you're delivering, and it may not mean that you've made that change yet, but you're working towards it. So that subset dosage is what you will use as your definition of served. Okay. So for this program, that's 12 sessions of 30 to 45 minutes per session, 3 times per week. Right. And then for your target, the number you're going to report for your output, you have to consider the following factors. You have to consider the number of members. For this program, it's 30. The type of members. They'd have 3/4 time members. The intervention dosage, which we just talked about, 3 one-on-one sessions per week for 30 to 45 minutes per session. The access, which we talked about, and then the state of the beneficiaries, like where are they starting from, right? So if we look on the right of your screen, you have the actual measure there. 450 students served, K through 3, Tier 2 students in 4 elementary schools, which equates to 15 students per member. A very reasonable number for 3/4 time members to handle during an academic school year. Now, some red flags could be if you only list 200 students served. That's only 6 students per member, but 3/4 time members typically have to serve between 30 to 35 hours per week. So that's a very small number of students per each member. Or the opposite, you say 1,000 students served, which would equal 33 students per member, which is a lot if you're providing that one-on-one support to them. Okay, so those are things that would flag to a reviewer. For your outcome performance measures, you have to do the same thing. You have to define some terms and consider some rules and regulations. For the outcome, you have to define upfront what is your definition of improved and talk about the tool you'll use to collect the data that allows you to determine if your standard of improved is met. And the tool has to align with any requirements that are outlined in the instructions. No matter what your outcome performance measure is, that concept is the same. So if we look at ED5A, the number of students with improved academic performance, you have to determine your definition of improved academic performance. At what level do individuals need to improve to be counted? So Amy said they were doing the MAP assessment. Does that mean they have to go up 10 points on the MAP? They have to increase 1 grade level on the MAP. What does that mean? What is that definition of improved? And then you have to have a tool to measure that academic performance. AmeriCorps requires either a standardized test, report card grade, or other instrument capable of measuring changes in academic performance at the individual beneficiary level. And also states when possible, pre-post assessments should be utilized. That information is listed straight from the performance measure instruction. Okay, so these are the things you have to consider. Any questions on performance measures or the performance measure instructions right now? Feel free to unmute yourself if that's easier. All right, well, I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to finish this up.
Great. All right. Again, sharing the screen. Right. So our next step is to talk about after performance measures is spending time talking about evaluation. So remember we said performance measures are about the getting you grounded in some decent data about your program. They only tell one part of your AmeriCorps story, and they help you become an evidence-informed AmeriCorps program. Um, Evidence building can happen in so many different ways. In the middle is evidence you build just from basic data collection, just like we just talked about with performance measures. And maybe remember that evidence stool we were showing where you could collect other data points that help you show that if all of them are getting positive information from teacher reported feedback to report grades and on, then that helps you grow in a stronger foundation of evidence informed. Um, and while that data is great, it does also not tell you that what you're doing is definitely having an impact. So that's where evaluation can come into play, where you can grow in your evidence and learn more information about your program. And the more you go outside of the circle, the more rigorous the evaluations are going to be, and the more ability you have to tie your activities to the outcomes you're seeing. So, you could start with a process evaluation, which allows you to see if what you're doing is being implemented across your program or in the way you intended it to be, and if not, why. And then you could add another layer of looking more at outcomes on the people or spaces you serve. And then you could go out another layer and look at it from more of an impact evaluation approach. And I'm going to talk about what all of these things mean. So the larger you get around in the circle, the greater the evidence is that shows what you're doing is leading to the impact you're seeing. So here are some terms that you need to know to grow your understanding around the different types of evaluations you can do. Again, in the implementation or process evaluation, you're examining how your program is being implemented to, its level, to its quality, to its fidelity, to its consistency, any training or conditions that you want to, that you're requiring for the success of your program. It can look at those different things. An outcome study, measures your outcome from the program or treatment group, and it's not doing like a comparison between another group. It's not as rigorous. It would just be maybe a pre-post measurement or some kind of a retrospective post pre-design. As you go into an impact study, whether you're using randomized controlled trial or quasi-experimental, those are evaluations that have more rigor to them and then can actually show that causation. If you use a randomized control trial, you're randomly assigning participants or spaces into an experimental group and a control group. And if you're doing quasi-experimental design, your beneficiaries in a comparison group are statistically matched. You're taking two groups that are statistically matched, they're similar, and seeing what are the outcomes for both groups. Um, Now, in talking about all the different types of evaluation, it's really important that you understand the requirements around evaluation. And these requirements can vary based upon if you're applying for the competitive pool of dollars, which are the national pool of dollars, or the state pool of dollars, which we call the formula dollars. So for your state commission, if you're applying directly to serve Washington in their state formula pool of funding, their requirements actually currently mirror what is required at a national level. So as you see here on the screen with both pool of dollars, you at if you have gotten 3 years of funding under your belt, you have to submit an evaluation plan that you're going to then implement over the next couple of years in your next 3-year grant cycle. If you've gotten 6 years or more of funding, in either formula or competitive, you have to not only submit a report, an evaluation report on what you did, but you also have to submit another evaluation plan on something you're going to evaluate in the next few years of your next 3-year grant cycle. So they're the exact same for your state, but And with both of them, you depend upon your funding level, you have different requirements, but you have the ability to request what's called an alternative evaluation approach. But the process and requirements are very different. For, Serve Washington, it's a much easier process. For if you are in the AmeriCorps competitive pool, it's a more rigorous process where you have to go through an approval process and probably many iterations of an alternative request. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So let's talk just a bit briefly about the requirements based upon your funding level. So AmeriCorps divides programs into two categories. They call them small grantees and large grantees. Small grantees are ones that get less than $500,000 per year from AmeriCorps. If you think about your budget, it's the CNCS side of the grant. And for these program types, you have actually a few different options on what you do in terms of evaluation. You can choose to do a process evaluation or an outcome evaluation. I mean, you could even do an impact evaluation if you wanted to. I don't really see that happening with the smaller grantees, but you could. It can be something that you do internally. So you could have internal staff of your organization carry out the evaluation, or you could have someone external to your organization do it. It can be non-experimental, it could be quasi-experimental, it could be experimental. It could be on one particular aspect of your program or several. It could be one program year or more than one program year. And it could be on either the get things done or the member experience side. So you have a whole bunch of different options on what you look at. On the large grantee side, those are grantees that get $500,000 or more per year. Again, like if you look at the budget, we're talking about on the CNCS side of the budget. And for those program types, there are some options. They're less options than the small grantees, but there's still some flexibility. You have to do an impact evaluation. On the large grantee side, it has to be independent and external. So someone external from your organization has to carry it out. It has to include a comparison or a control group. It has to be either that experimental or quasi-experimental we talked about a few slides ago. Again, it could look at one particular aspect of your program or several. It could be one program year or more, although you need to make sure you can carry it out in the first 2 years of your 3-year grant cycle. And it also could be on the get things done side or the member experience. So there's still some flexibility, but the requirement for the type of evaluation you do is pretty set in terms of it has to be an impact externally carried out evaluation. But for either one, you could request an alternative evaluation approach that again we'll talk about in a moment. So once you decide on the evaluation you want to carry out, you have to submit an evaluation plan for which there's a template. A template's been provided to you by AmeriCorps that Serve Washington provides you access to, and you fill it out. There's several different samples, and I think I'm going to try to share with you all a few that AmeriCorps has provided over the years. So, you're not having to start from scratch. This is a screenshot of one. But after this training, I'm going to share with Sir Washington to make available to you some samples that AmeriCorps provides so you can take a look at how other people have done evaluation plans. So I want to talk to you about the steps you should take in creating your evaluation plan. We're going to backtrack just a little bit and then get to where you make some decisions about what type of evaluation. But the first step is looking at your logic model, really. So as you write your grant this year, if some of you are re-competing this year or competing for the first time, you really need to pay very close attention to your logic model, because your logic model is what you look at to determine what question you want to answer or prove and what you want to look at and collect more information about. So all evaluations should answer some kind of a research question and should test part of your program's theory of change as depicted in your logic models. It's a really important first step and really helps you look at what components you want to collect more data around. And I don't know if we talked about this on the last call, but a logic model is essentially divided into two sides. There's the process side that focuses on how the program's activities are carried out. And then there's the outcome side. So you could either look at the process side with the inputs, activities, and outputs to determine a process evaluation you want to do, or you could look at the outcome side to determine if there's something you want to learn more about and do an outcome or impact evaluation on. And then the next step is to use that logic model to set the purpose and scope of the evaluation, which essentially establishes like the parameters of what you want to do. So you're gonna, have to think about, why is this evaluation being done? What do we hope to gain from it? What requirements does it need to fulfill? So you really have to look at the requirements based upon the size of your budget, and also, what your opportunities and limitations are. Maybe which components of the program are the strongest candidates for evaluation. And yeah, I think it also looks at your life cycle and how long you've been in an AmeriCorps program. If you're a new program, you might want to look at a process evaluation if you're a small grantee, to see if things are being carried out as you want them to. And then in the next grant cycle, you might look at an outcome evaluation. And just overall, does it align with your long-term hopes for the program? And then what resources do you have? Because evaluations can be expensive, so you have to consider your budget, your staff capacity in terms of numbers and expertise, time you have. So there's a lot of factors that play into what kind of evaluation you can do. And you might also consider some questions like, what data do you already have? Or is there something you really want to learn more about in terms of either how you're doing something or what you're achieving? Or what ideas do you have on things you could, study or build upon? And just, ultimately think about, what do I want to do first? And then as if you remember the continuum from earlier, your hope is that over every 3 years, you kind of grow in that learning and build upon what was done before. And then step three is determining that type of evaluation. Is it a process evaluation, or is it an outcome, or in the more rigorous term, we call it an impact evaluation? And remember this 2 slides ago, I think on the logic model, we talked about the 2 sides. Those are the 2 different areas on which you could decide what kind of evaluation you want to do. And it's important to highlight that process and outcome or impact evaluations have several notable differences, especially in terms of their goals. The results of a process evaluation are most often used to either change or improve upon a program, or keep something like it is if it's really working well. It can be used to document what a program is doing and to what extent, how consistently it's demonstrating the fidelity to the logic model. And then, of course, the outcome or impact evaluation's purpose is to determine what results or effects your program is happening and having. And that could be on short-term effects, mid-term effects, most likely not a long-term effect unless you've been in operation for a really long time. And then depending upon if you use um, outcome or impact evaluation, the level of rigor you would do will be different. And both of these can include qualitative data or quantitative data. And it can be through interviews, surveys, looking at already existing data. There's all different ways that you can collect information. Okay. And then just remember that if you're $500,000 or more, the requirement is that you do an impact evaluation unless you request an alternative evaluation, or if you're less than 500,000, you have some options. Okay. I just wanted to share with you all, and you're going to get these slides later, it's like sample questions or things to think about if you're looking at either the process or outcome or impact side of things. So the questions you see here are things you can think about if you wanted to explore the process side of things. You might consider things like the way in which members are delivering the service, or you maybe want to look at the preparation that you're giving members in terms of training or supervision. Maybe uh, what something that keeps you up at night that you wish your program could do better. Maybe that's something that makes you think you want to study that area more. or something new that your program is doing that you'd like to learn if it's working as you'd like it to, or maybe there's something that you really think is working great and you want to collect some information on it to prove that it's working great. There's all different kinds of things you can think about on the process side. And on the outcome or impact side, you may want to consider some things like are there some things that you're consistently hearing positive feedback about from your members or your partners or the people you serve that maybe makes you think you should collect more information on it because it's likely having some really important impact? Or, maybe there's some evidence you wish you had on your program because you know it's happening and you want to showcase it more. Um, or maybe what do you want to know more about in terms of outcomes that maybe you don't totally know? Maybe some unintended outcomes that you'd like to capture that you don't have clear data on right now. And then step 4 is to, once you decide on the type of evaluation you want to do, you have to finalize your research questions. Excuse me. So, the question is really what's going to guide what you do. And research questions should be clear, specific, well defined, focus on some program outcome or component, be something you can measure, and it should be, of course, aligned with your logic model. And the approach for research questions differs depending upon whether you're doing a process or an outcome evaluation. I mean, and as this graphic you're seeing right now, it illustrates that, process evaluation questions focus on the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And outcome and impact evaluations focus on the changes, the effects, the impacts. And I'm giving you some sample questions for you also to look at. So here's a slide with some example process evaluation questions. I have a couple of slides on that. So if you're wanting to look at how the program is being implemented, you could, look at sample questions like are staff implementing the program within the same time frame, with the same intended target population, what variations in implementation, if any, occur by site. If you're a multi-site program, you might want to look at how things are being carried out at each site, if they're being done similarly or differently. And are there unique challenges to implementing the program by site? If you're wanting to look at how program beneficiaries describe their experience, there's some sample questions here, or what resources are being described as needed for implementing the program, like you're wanting to get recommendations for future implementation. I'm just giving you a few sample questions. And then in terms of outcome questions, um, you know, uh, they're really looking to see if you're having a change or effect on a particular outcome or set of outcomes. And they should ask whether your model or your program or the component of your program is resulting in the predicted outcome you're hoping it to see. And here's like a template that you can look at, like, did the model program have a change effect on the outcomes for individuals, groups, or organizations? And you can remember the example from earlier, is our literacy intervention having an impact on the K through 3 students we are serving? That's an example of the outcome question. Or did program beneficiaries change their knowledge, attitude, behavior, condition after program completion? Or did all types of program beneficiaries benefit from the program or only specific subgroups? These are just examples of different outcome questions. Here's an example of how an impact question might differ a little bit. Are there differences in outcomes for program participants compared to those not in the program? So you're still looking at an outcome, but you're seeing if there's a difference between your program participants and a comparison group that's not getting the information and intervention. Okay. Um, Here's again another, it says exercise, but it's actually taken from another session I did where we had some activities that they did because we had some longer time. But again, just another set group of possible research questions that could spur some ideas for you all. I think the more you can look at other evaluations, the better ideas you can get. And you all can go on the AmeriCorps Evidence Exchange, which is the space on AmeriCorps' website where they house all their evaluations that they've, given their approval on. And you can look at what evaluations other folks did. What questions did they explore? How did they carry it out? All of this can help you get some ideas on what you'd like to do. You invest a lot of money and time in doing evaluation, and you want to make sure it's worthwhile for you and the program and the organization, in addition to just satisfying that requirement. Because remember those assumptions we talked about earlier. Um, the evaluations can give a lot of um, fuel for you to tell your story better and to learn about what you're doing or how you're doing something. So the more you look at samples, I think the better. And then as we wrap up our time with the evaluation piece, I just wanted to wrap up with talking a little bit about the culture of learning, which kind of ties into what we were talking about with the assumptions. Learning isn't attained by chance. It's sought for with ardor and attended to with diligence. That quote by Abigail Adams is really super important to think about because having a culture of learning in your organization requires a lot of time, consistency, diligence, written systems. It's not something that happens just with the snap of a finger or by chance. And ultimately, we're all trying to increase our ability to be a learning organization, to regularly take in new information and knowledge so that we can use those insights to make our programs better and continuously improve. And if we don't do that, then we're kind of spinning that same wheel as the cartoon shows, and the wheel's not really helping us because it's making life harder for us almost. So becoming a learning organization is super important because ultimately we're trying to develop practices and programs that move us towards greater effectiveness because the work you all are doing is so super important. You're addressing problems in your communities that are are strikingly bad in communities. I mean, whether it's high poverty rates and that impact people's academic performance or abilities to be financially stable or to have housing, or working on spaces and environments that have been in disrepair. Whatever it is that you're working on is super important. So it's really important that you collect that information and learn from it and take action on it and just don't submit it as a part of a requirement. And as a reminder, it can be both about the member side and the get things done side. All right. So I want to stop and just see if we have any questions before we go into our final notes of the day. Okay. See anything in the chat, but I'll take a second just to see if anyone wants to pause and unmute their mic and ask a question.
Amy, you mentioned somewhere that you can go and look at other evaluation questions, evaluations that have been approved already.
Mhm.
Where is that? That's
New. Well, good.
yeah,
It's the AmeriCorps Exchange, and I can look it up in a second, or maybe Jennifer's doing it right now and is going to put the link. I can see her
she's nodding over there.
eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a space on AmeriCorps' website where they house all the evaluations that they have kind of gone through the rigor of approving and say is without lack of a better word, worthy of being put on the website. It's of their competitive portfolio programs. And it's a
Okay.
great place to look. You can search by type of evaluation, by focus area. Sometimes you come up with stuff, sometimes you don't, but you could just start to look around and see if things give you ideas. And I
Okay.
think she just put
Awesome.
it in the
Jennifer, are
chat.
those links both going to the same spot?
Yeah.
Yes, my computer sometimes just does the words, so I wanted to have the actual address in there, but they're both the same.
Perfect. Thank you. That's exciting.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I am also going to send you all, or I'm going to send to Serve Washington to make available to you a few different resources, one of which is some sample evaluation plans of all the different types. So you can also look at how people word things in the different required sections of the evaluation plan template. Any other questions? Great. Just to remind you of some things, there's many resources available to you as always. AmeriCorps has on their website technical assistance webinars that they've recorded in the past that are available on different topics. Serve Washington is making these sessions available to you all. They've all been recorded, and so the recordings are available if you weren't able to attend previous ones or you just want to hear information again. And then all of you all have access to the On3Learn courses, of which we've regularly referenced a few times. So there's the applicant courses. You'll see courses on all the elements of the grant application, including Is Our Organization a Fit course. And then we have some On3Learn staff courses that are also pretty helpful. The performance measure one will go over a lot of the stuff that Jennifer talked about, but it also shows you things in e-grants and different things you have to complete. And then we have an 8-part evidence series, which also helps you think through growing your evidence and all the things, the steps that you need to take to build your evidence. Starting, of course, also with the logic model. So that's a really good series that you all have access to for free. And as a reminder, we have the training series calendar. The last one will be on the 19th. Same time, same space on budget nuts and bolts. We began the first webinar, which is a budget development 101, but this is going to get into the nuts and bolts of the AmeriCorps budget, which I'm sure all of you all will be really wanting to see. And then are there any other, as we wrap up, final questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
It's more on the evaluation
Yes.
plan. If you're in the, and I don't know if this might be you or Lou, and if it's not the right place, can ask my question later. But for those of us who might be in that 3 to 6 year range, developed our programs with data that was pre-COVID. Now the world has changed and we're looking at maybe changing our performance measures. This is wonderful for that reason. And the world is changing around us again. When it comes to the evaluation, how close, is it okay just to evaluate what you were doing, even if you change it? Do you know what they like to see?
Well,
Does
I
that
think
make sense?
regardless of I think so, regardless of if you change your performance measure. So I assume you've been funded for at least 3 years. You're
Yes.
entering into a new 3-year cycle, so you have to create that evaluation plan. Let's say you change your program model and you choose some different performance measures. Regardless of if you do that, your evaluation could look at anything moving forward. So it's not going back into the past. It could be depend upon your size of your budget, but you also have the ability. I thought I had a slide in there, and I'm sorry I didn't. You have the ability to request an alternative evaluation approach. So let's say you are requesting over $500,000, but you just changed your program model and you really want to do a process evaluation in the RGA and the request for grant applications, they show a process that you email, I believe it's Lou, to request an alternative approach. So maybe you would want to do a process evaluation because you want to test out a new design that you're implementing. Or if you are really keeping consistent with your member side of things, you could do something on the member side and do an outcome evaluation with members and see if you're having the intended outcome that you want to have with your AmeriCorps members. Does that help
Thank you.
answer your question?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and Lou just responded. You can evaluate any aspect of your logic model, and if you already have a plan in place and want to change it, they're flexible too. You just have to let Lou or your program officer know. I mean, your commission is here to support you. Their goal is to, make sure you're successful. And so if something's not working out and you want to do something different, they're willing to have conversations with you. And Richard asked, I'm not sure I totally know this question. Where are the recordings of the session? Are they on the Serve Washington website? Or are they in Basecamp? I forget.
They are on the Serve Washington website.
Okay. Great. All right. Any other final questions? These are good questions, good comments. All right, I know that we will wrap up with sending that, or Serve Washington will send the recording of this after it's done. I also follow up and we'll email them the slides and the sample evaluation plans that I discussed that they can share with you in addition to the recording. And then if you all have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And also we'll see you again on that last webinar. So that can be another opportunity to ask questions you didn't get to ask on the first three that you want to make sure you don't leave unanswered. All right. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day and week, and we'll see you on the 19th. We'll
Take
stay
care.
around just for a few more minutes to answer questions if there any come up.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.